our cybersecurity training, this time on social engineering. So in this session, we're covering what's known as social engineering. We'll obviously start with what that is and define that. But really what we're going to cover today with this is an area that touches on various different parts of cybersecurity. So social engineering goes into kind of passwords that we've already talked about in part 1, and also around email and phishing emails, which we'll talk about in part 3, but actually covers a vast area of cybersecurity, including online, including social media, actually including things like the telephone, and even different file types and things like that. So it's important to understand this area of cybersecurity because it does touch in lots of different parts of the world of cybercrime. And although we'll touch on some key ones in this, it's important to bear it in mind with everything we talk about. We'll also go into kind of how this makes money, which can be a difficult one to understand sometimes. So we just talk about the processes that are going on in the background to understand what the end game is, what we need to do to spot when social engineering is occurring, and the key things we need to do as end users to try and prevent it as best we possibly can. So what is social engineering? So I use this example in training quite a lot, and although we can't do it in the same way over a video training session, I think it's an important thought process to go through, because ultimately what we're dealing with when it comes to cybercrime are criminals, and sometimes you have to remind yourself of that this is big business, if you like, but it's also big crime, and we won't go massively into kind of why this kind of crime exists, but ultimately it's a very difficult crime to stop due to the fact that a lot of this takes place in different countries, and being able to prosecute across borders and all of that side of things is very difficult. But also because these guys know what they're doing, they're very clever individuals, and they're working a system and trying to find ways to make money out of something. And if we take it back to probably the most old school and probably stereotypical criminal activity there could be, which would be robbing a bank. So this is a picture of Barclays Bank in Hull. One of the tasks we have is to say, right, well, as a group of people, if you were trying to rob a bank, what would be your options? How would you do it? And the typical kind of responses you get, probably expected, would be to say, we'll drive a van into the cash machine and we'll rip the cash machine out, a load of cash in there. Balaclavas will go on the heads if not, and in with shotguns, and we'll go down that route. And when we get down these kind of brute force style attacks, actually banks have cottoned on to this a long time ago in some respects. If you think about, there's quite often bollards around cash points now to stop those sort of attacks from a security point of view, with their security staff or sort of sliding shutters that come down, or only people with certain access to cash within a bank. A lot of these things have been covered by what they're trying to do. And relatively speaking, although I've never tried myself, I imagine it's quite a hard job nowadays to make money from robbing a bank. Not partly because that's difficult, but also the fact that you're going to get caught at the end of it. And obviously part of what the activity of cybercrime is also not getting caught at the end of it. Now, interestingly, one of the, if you like, most maybe the most worrying, but one of the other common things that comes up is someone talking about actually going down a different route, maybe actually getting a job in the bank and working your way up so that you get access, and we almost get into a kind of a fraud area there, or maybe using a friend who maybe works in the bank, or a colleague to do something with you who has different access and all of this. And when we start to get into those ideas, we start to get into the mind of social engineering, which is a lot more around kind of working the system and getting away with it at the end. So actually, when we start thinking like a criminal, it does come down to this idea that we have to work around the system that we've got if we want to be successful. And we're obviously at the other end of that, in that we don't want to get robbed. We don't want to lose our money. We don't want to lose our data. So we have to be fully aware, just like the banks are, of how they protect themselves against crime. We have to be fully aware as end users what we have to do to stop the cyber criminals tricking us and winning effectively. And I love this quote: for every lock there's someone out there trying to pick it or break it. And I think the interesting thing about cybercrime is that lock is constantly changing. We're always updating our software, our cybersecurity solutions, and what we have to do as end users is make sure we update our thinking and our knowledge through training just like this, to ensure that we aren't the weak point in that lock. We aren't the bit that can be picked. We aren't the bit that allows somebody to get in and do something that we don't want to do. And it's quite common. So good example here, your Netflix account has been suspended. These are the sort of things that are happening now. So playing on the fact that Netflix is obviously a very well used system now, and sending out an email saying it's been suspended might instantly make us go, oh, I don't want that to happen. I want to watch my box set tonight. Click on my account, enter my login details, and immediately give away my details straight away to somebody who could then potentially log in, find my details on there, or use my Netflix account without me knowing it effectively one way or another. So very small kind of example of a hack there, but the sort of thing that we're going to go into and really see what the impact of this can be on a larger scale. So this is an interesting one that shows the progression of this, because this sort of social engineering has been around for a long time in different formats, but now these three brands, the thing that they have in common is they are the most spoofed brands when it comes to email phishing, and there is a separate session on email phishing where we talk about this. But email phishing is a good example of social engineering, trying to trick us to do something by making it seem genuine, using brands, using logos, using emails that we think we can trust, and therefore taking an action that actually we shouldn't have done if we had taken a step back and thought about it. So how does it make money? So I've given that example of Netflix. They can log into my Netflix account and all of a sudden they can watch all the movies and films that are available to them, but it doesn't really make them any money. So how do they do this on a larger scale? Now, just to give you some context around this, this is a graph of some ransomware. So a piece of ransomware called SamSam. Ransomware effectively gets onto a PC or a computer or a server and encrypts files, so scrambles them all up and puts an incredibly complex password or key, which unless you have that key, you cannot access those files again. And when that happens to a business and all of that data is scrambled up, what the cyber criminals do is they request a ransom for that key. And depending on the size of business, depending on the amount of data, the value of the data, that can be anything from £1,000 to £1 million. In the SME market for small and medium-sized businesses, we saw various examples between about £5,000 and £50,000 when it came to ransom fees. And you can see here that in about an 18-month period, this piece of ransomware made $5.9 million US for the people who wrote the software. So it is big business and it is making money in this scenario. So there are typically three ways that are used at the moment. This does change, but these are three of the most common ways. So the first one is ransomware, so encrypting files for ransom payments. Second one is something called cryptojacking. So effectively, I access a computer or a server, and then I use the power of that server to do something. So that historically used to be sending out lots of spam emails without them fear of detection. Nowadays, it can also be used for mining kind of cryptocurrency and things like that. So actually it creates things like Bitcoins free of charge because you're using other people's computing power, normally on a big scale, so that you can do that completely free, undetected again, and actually make real money or cryptocurrency that can be converted to sort of, if you like, normal day-to-day currency without fear of detection, actually without any upfront cost to them, across multiple servers and devices. And finally, social engineering. Now, social engineering in its purest form can be used to access data and personal details. Now, what's interesting around social engineering is it actually can be used as leverage for the top two as well. Because if somebody, for example, were to hack me and I have access to various different parts of my company's network and system, and they could use my login details to actually access these places and deploy ransomware, for example, on a server, or to take over part of that network for cryptojacking. So although it might be able to access my Netflix account for one thing, also able to get hold of my personal details, maybe my login details, maybe my passwords, and therefore use my access to do other nasty and horrible things that have more obvious ways of making money. And quite often what we see with social engineering is that it is a stepped process. It isn't a case of you do one thing, you make money. It's a case of you do one thing to access something else and then make money, and then maybe 3 or 4 steps along that process. So what do we need to look out for? Okay, so the first one, we'll just talk a bit about email phishing. And like I said, there is a whole separate section on this, but this is a very common way of getting someone to do something that they shouldn't do. I'll show you the Netflix one. This is a PayPal one. And what we're really looking out for, and although you might not quite be able to see this on screen, is we're looking out for things like the sender's email address. So in this scenario, it's notice@paypal.com, not PayPal. It's the branding, it's the lack of personalization. It's also the fact as well here that it's saying that I've done something. So I've added in this scenario a new email address. Now, if I haven't done that, I want to be querying, why am I getting this email? And if I'm concerned, then I should go to the URL paypal.com. The normal way I go to it, rather than on the link through this email or an attachment, I think in this scenario, that is on that email, to see what's going on and see if I've got any notifications within my account. So I need to be really wary of email phishing campaigns. I also need to be careful online, and sometimes this link may come from an email, it may come from somewhere else, of where I'm entering payment details or personal information. I want to be checking the URL at the top of the screen to say, is that a URL I trust? So in this scenario, if it's Apple, does it say apple.com at the top? If it doesn't, I want to be wary. I want to go back to the original URL and follow the steps through that process. So anything online where it's asking for my details, I want to be super careful again. Social media. Social media is a strange one because it feels like it catches people out and it's very hard to see the end game. And I've got plenty of people on my social media accounts who I would consider well-educated and sensible people who regularly share or comment or like posts of things like Tesco's giving away a £100 voucher, or in this scenario Starbucks, or someone who's somehow got a warehouse full of iPads that haven't got a box, which are for some reason worthless, and they're giving them away. Now, understanding that the process to go through from actually liking or commenting a page to how they make money out of you might be a difficult one, but it's about gathering data. So as in, if they can get your data, because if you like something or follow something on Facebook, it allows that person to access certain parts of your data. It also allows them to target you. So it's very easy to change pages on social media to be something completely different then. Just because you like the Tesco's thing, they might then change that page to be something else. You still like it because you like that page, and then target you and trying to get you to either log into something or enter your details into something that you really don't want to give away. So again, a step process, but you need to be careful. Generally, it's a case of, is this too good to be true? And if the answer is yes, then it probably is not true. Files and macros is an interesting one. So there are various different things here of looking out for file types that you are not comfortable with, don't know what they are, certainly if they're sent by email, but also true if they come on a USB stick or if you're downloading them online. One of the ones that has caught people out a lot in the past has been macros in Microsoft Word and Excel documents. So you'll see on screen there a little macros have been disabled, enable content. Now that may seem fairly harmless, and it's also quite similar to a little pop-up that comes up if a file is locked and you need to unlock it, and they are different. And this one in particular, the macros one, is the one that you need to look out for. So macros effectively allows a little kind of script or program to run in the background of Word and Excel, and cyber criminals have been known to put viruses in those scripts. Now, it's very unlikely that unless you are dealing with a very complex Word or Excel document, for a good reason, that you will need macros. So this should ring alarm bells. Certainly if you don't know what they are, it should ring alarm bells. If you do, obviously then you need to be super careful around this as well. And the same goes with any kind of strange file types. I put exe files there and zip files there, but there's lots of different types of files, .sys files, for example, things like that, that you need to be careful of. Ultimately, if you're not sure what it is, then you need to be careful. And it's also worth talking a little bit about the telephone. So we talk about online a lot when it comes to cyber, email, website, social media, but some of this stuff still does happen quite traditionally on the phone. So people phoning up and asking for information, trying to get through to people, and ultimately building trust. And a lot of this is about trust. So talk about brand names and using big brand names to build trust. Some common ones that have happened in the past are people phoning up asking, for example, for bank details to be changed, pretending to be one of your customers or one of your suppliers, so that payments go to this new bank account rather than someone else's. And they'll actually phone the most junior member of the team first, rather than going straight to the manager. They'll phone the most junior team, because what happens then is that junior member passes them up to a more senior member of the team, And that's seen as an internal referral, really. So there's some trust there. So when phone says, oh, I've got so-and-so on the phone, they need to do X, Y, and Z, then you're much more likely to trust that than someone out of the blue phoning you and saying, we need to change our bank details. So you need to be careful on the phone just as well as online. Okay, so just to finish up, what do we need to do? We always need to think about things like sender's email. So is it coming from where we think it's going to go? If they're sending me to a link, is that a website URL that I know and trust and makes sense? Is it asking me to download stuff that I don't recognize? If so, maybe I shouldn't do that. Is it too good to be true? Is this an offer that just isn't going to happen? Like I say, free iPads, free Land Rovers, they're not going to happen on social media. Does it look genuine? And if something on there doesn't work, what can I do to double check? So can you phone your IT company? Can you check with a colleague? If it's an email from a colleague, can you pick up the phone and ask them, did you really mean to send me this? Why has it got macros on it? Or why have you sent me this file? Or why have you asked me to transfer this money? So be alert and make sure that you do your process of double checking if anything doesn't seem quite right. Okay, so hopefully I've given you some information there about social engineering so you can understand what it is, what they're trying to do, how to spot it, and what actions you need to take. Thank you very much.